Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're all about getting those little things right. The everyday actions that add up over time.
Exactly. Like we're talking habits.
Yeah, habits. And our guide for this deep dive is James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Ah, great choice. It's a really practical book for understanding how habits work, how to build good ones, and maybe even tougher, how to kick those bad ones to the curb.
Right, and he doesn't just throw theory at you.
Nope, he's got tons of real life examples. In fact, he starts the book with a pretty powerful story of his own.
Oh yeah, about how he used those atomic habits to recover from a serious injury in high school.
It's crazy. He went from like being sidelined from baseball to becoming an academic All-American.
Talk about a comeback. It's proof that small, consistent wins can lead to some pretty huge changes.
It really is. It's kind of like the tortoise and the hare, but for self-improvement, right?
Totally. So let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, let's do it.
Clear lays out this thing called the habit loop. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Think of it as a cycle, like a feedback loop that's always running in our brains.
Okay, I'm listening.
So it starts with a cue, basically something in your environment that triggers a behavior.
Like, seeing your phone light up with a notification.
Exactly. Or maybe the smell of coffee brewing in the morning.
Okay, so you see the notification, smell that coffee, and then what?
Then comes the craving. This is like the fuel behind the habit, the desire for the reward.
So you see that notification, and bam, you want to know what's up. That feeling of being connected, right?
Right. Or you smell that coffee and you just crave that energy boost, that familiar taste.
Got it, the craving. What happens next?
That craving leads to the response, the actual habit you perform. You check your phone, you pour yourself a cup of coffee, whatever it is.
Makes sense, but I mean, it can't stop there, right?
You're right. Here's the kicker. The loop keeps going. There's the reward, the satisfaction you get from doing the habit, and that strengthens the whole loop.
Ah, so like that hit of dopamine from seeing a funny meme on your phone or the taste of that delicious coffee, it reinforces the whole cycle.
Precisely. So the next time you see your phone light up or smell those coffee beans, you're even more likely to repeat the whole thing.
It's like our brains are wired to seek those rewards, to crave that satisfaction.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the habit loop is so powerful. You see how these cues, cravings, responses, and rewards work together, then you can actually start to change things. You can interrupt the bad habits, reinforce the good ones.
It's like becoming a habit detective. You figure out those hidden patterns in your behavior, and then you could become a habit programmer, right? Tweaking the code for better results.
I like that, a habit programmer. And you know what's even more interesting? Clear talks about how our environment shapes our habits, often without us even realizing it.
This is where things get really mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
Like, willpower isn't the only factor at play here. Our surroundings can nudge us in different directions.
Think about it. If you want to eat healthier, but you've got a bowl of candy sitting right there on your desk.
You're basically setting yourself up for failure, right?
Yeah.
You're going to reach for that candy every time you walk by.
It's like trying to run uphill with weights on your ankles. It's just making it harder than it needs to be.
So instead of battling against your environment, Clear suggests you design it to work for you.
Yes. Hide the candy, put a bowl of fruit out instead. Make the healthy choice the easy choice.
So it's like we get to choose our own adventure, but with our habits. We can decide what options we're presented with.
Exactly. And sometimes it's as simple as using visual cues to remind ourselves of what we want to do.
Oh, like leaving your workout clothes out the night before so you're ready to go in the morning.
Exactly. Or if you want to start flossing regularly, keep the floss right next to your toothbrush. Make it obvious.
Out of sight, out of mind, as they say.
Yeah.
But when it's right there in your face, it's a lot harder to ignore.
Right. And it's not just about making good habits obvious. It's also about making bad habits invisible.
Like if scrolling through social media is your weakness, log out of those apps. Or even better, delete them for a while.
Exactly. You remove the temptation, make it harder to access those bad habits. It's like building a wall around your good intentions.
Speaking of good intentions, sometimes the hardest part is just getting started.
Oh, I know that feeling. You look at this huge task, this new habit you want to build, and it just feels overwhelming.
Totally. So is there a way to make that initial step a little easier?
There is, and Clear has this brilliant strategy he calls the 2-minute rule.
Okay, I'm all ears. I need all the help I can get when it comes to starting new habits.
It's so simple but so effective. You break down any new habit you want to create into a 2-minute version.
So instead of saying, I'm going to meditate for 30 minutes every day,
You start with, I'm just going to sit down and close my eyes for 2 minutes.
I love it. It's like a little mind trick to get over that initial hump. You're not committing to this huge, daunting thing.
Exactly. And often, once you've overcome that initial inertia, you find yourself wanting to keep going. Those 2 minutes might turn into 5, then 10, maybe even longer.
It's like reverse psychology for your own brain.
Hmm.
Trick yourself into starting small, and then whoosh, you're off and running.
That's the idea. You prove to yourself you can do it, and those small wins can lead to some pretty big changes over time.
This is making me think about all the times I've talked myself out of starting something new because it just felt too big, too scary.
It's a common trap we fall into, but the 2-minute rule can really help. It's like a permission slip to start small and build from there.
I like that, a permission slip to start small. And it seems like we're starting to see a pattern here, right? Making those good habits obvious, attractive, and easy. But what about making them satisfying? How does that play into the equation?
That's where the long-term magic happens. It's about making those habits stick.
Because, let's be honest, our brains are wired for instant gratification.
Oh, absolutely. We want those rewards now, consequences later. It's like our inner caveman running the show sometimes.
Uh-huh. Me want cookie now. Me worry about sugar crash later.
Exactly. And that's why we need to find ways to make good habits feel good, even if the big payoff comes later.
Okay, so how do we hack our brains into making those healthy choices, those productive actions, as satisfying as those quick hits of dopamine?
There are a few tricks we can use. Claire talks about using visual reinforcement, like a habit tracker. You know, those charts or apps where you check off each day you stick to your habit?
Oh yeah, I love those. It's like giving yourself a gold star for every little win. It makes the whole process feel more real, more motivating.
Exactly. Our brains love to see progress, that sense of accomplishment. Another approach is to build in immediate rewards. Let's say you're trying to save money. You can make a rule that for every $100 you put into savings, you treat yourself to something small. A new book, a massage, whatever brings you joy.
Ah, so you're pairing the long-term goal of saving with a little bit of instant gratification to keep you going.
Exactly. You're making the process itself more rewarding. And another trick is to find ways to make the habit itself more enjoyable.
This is where things get fun, right? It's like turning your workout into a game or finding ways to make those work tasks feel more challenging, more engaging.
You got it. It's about tapping into that intrinsic motivation, making the activity itself the reward.
And this leads us to one of the most powerful ideas in the book, identity-based habits. This is where things get deep, right? It's not just about changing our actions. It's about changing our beliefs about ourselves.
This is where Atomic Habits goes beyond just a how-to book. It becomes almost like a philosophy of personal growth.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about this whole identity-based habit thing.
It all comes down to this. Your current habits are basically a reflection of who you believe you are. If you think of yourself as lazy, you're going to act in ways that confirm that belief. But if you start seeing yourself as disciplined, capable,
Then your actions will start to shift to match that new identity.
exactly. Clear suggests we flip the script. Instead of trying to force ourselves to change our habits, we start by changing our beliefs about ourselves.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty radical shift in thinking.
It can be, but it's incredibly powerful. You start asking yourself, who is the type of person who could achieve this goal? What would they do? How would they think? How would they act?
And then you start acting as if you're already that person.
Precisely. Even if it feels a little fake at first, you keep acting as if you're already the person you want to become. And over time, your beliefs will catch up with your actions. You'll start believing it because you're living it.
It's like those times you tell yourself, I'm not a morning person, or I'm just not good at math.
Those are perfect examples of limiting beliefs.
Right.
And what Clear is saying is that we can break free from those limitations.
Yeah.
We can create a new identity that actually empowers us to achieve our goals.
So it's not about becoming someone we're not. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves.
Right?
Tapping into that potential that's already there.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding the power of these small, seemingly insignificant habits, these atomic habits that can gradually shape our beliefs and ultimately our realities.
It's funny, this whole identity thing, it's like instead of feeling like you're dragging yourself to do something you hate, those actions, they become part of who you are.
Right. It's not I have to. It's more like I am. It's like way more empowering, don't you think?
Totally. And that actually leads us to another big idea from the book, finding that sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone of challenge.
Oh, yeah. The just right challenge. Not too easy, not too hard. like finding the perfect level of spice in your food.
Perfect analogy. Clear actually talks about this, how the most successful people, they can handle the boredom of training. They find that balance, pushing themselves just enough to keep growing.
It reminds me of those times you get so lost in a project, you completely lose track of time, like everything just flows.
Exactly, that flow state. Clear says we can tap into that more often by picking challenges that are right at the edge of our abilities. So it's about staying engaged, preventing that boredom from creeping in, right?
Hmm. Yeah. And this works for anything. Learning a new skill, tackling those boring chores, anything.
Okay, so let's talk about a challenge we all face, breaking those annoying bad habits.
Huh.
Clear's got some interesting ideas about that, right?
Oh, yeah. One of the most interesting ones is sometimes to break a bad habit, you got to make it impossible to do.
Now that's intriguing. How do you actually do that?
He gives this example of John Henry Patterson. He started the National Cash Register Company way back in the late 1800s.
Okay, so old school business story. I'm listening.
He had a big problem with employees stealing, tried all sorts of things, nothing worked. Then, bam, this new invention pops up, the cash register.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
He basically made it impossible for employees to steal by changing the whole system.
Exactly. He didn't rely on willpower or lectures. He just made doing the right thing, honest transactions, the easiest and most obvious option.
So we're back to environment design again, right? Using your surroundings to make good habits easier, bad habits harder.
Exactly. And you can use this for all kinds of bad habits.
Mm.
Want to cut back on screen time? Delete those tempting apps, trying to spend less money, leave your credit cards at home, only take cash.
That's like setting up roadblocks for those bad habits.
Yep. Now, while we're talking about things that can be good or bad, let's chat about variable rewards. You know how those can mess with our brains.
Oh, yeah, the mystery of the unknown. It's like slot machines. You keep pulling that lever, hoping for the big win, even though you know the odds are slim.
Exactly. Clear digs into this, how our brains get a dopamine rush just anticipating a reward even before we get it.
So it's not just the reward itself, it's the excitement of maybe getting it. Like every time you check your email, you're hoping for something amazing.
Oh, wait. That's why it's so hard to resist those habits, even when we know they're not the best for us.
So how do you outsmart those variable rewards? Can we use them for good instead of letting them control us?
Clear says we can. One way is to add some surprise and variety to our good habits.
So instead of the same old workout every day, maybe mix it up, try something new. Or, instead of your usual dinner routine, try a brand new recipe.
Yep. It's about keeping things fresh, keeping your brain engaged. And the other thing is, be aware of how those variable rewards are being used against you.
Like those apps and games designed to hook you, you got to set boundaries.
Exactly. Understand how they work and then choose how you want to play the game.
This makes me think technology is a double-edged sword with habits, right? It can help you track progress, stay motivated, but it can also be a huge distraction.
It's all about finding that balance, using technology to your advantage while being aware of those potential pitfalls.
Right. And speaking of pitfalls, what about those times you just can't seem to break a bad habit no matter what you try? Clear's got some advice for that too, right?
He does. And this one's interesting. He says sometimes the best way to deal with a bad habit isn't to fight it head on, but to kind of crowd it out with a good one.
That's a new way to look at it. So instead of resisting those unhealthy urges, you just focus on building healthier ones.
Yep. It's called habit replacement. Our brains are always looking for those rewards, so the idea is if you can channel that energy into something positive,
The bad habits just kind of fade away.
that's the hope. Clear says it's like redirecting a river. Instead of trying to dam it up, you create a new channel that leads to something better.
Love that analogy. So like if you're trying to stop snacking on junk food all the time, you always make sure you have healthy snacks around.
Exactly. Or if you're spending too much time on social media, you find a new hobby, something that actually fills you up.
It's about creating a world where it's just easier to make those good choices. And this brings us back to identity, right? Our actions really do shape who we believe we are.
Absolutely. Clear makes a big point of this. You don't need some massive life change to make progress. Small changes, day after day, those are the ones that start to reshape who you are.
It's like choosing to act like the person you want to be, even before you fully believe it.
Exactly. And the more you act that way, the more you start to believe it's true. It's a gradual process, you reinvent yourself one small habit at a time.
This is giving me a whole new way to think about personal growth. It's not about forcing yourself into some mold. It's about nudging yourself in the right direction, little by little.
And those little nudges, they add up. They can change your life and even the lives of those around you.
That's pretty amazing. So how do we create that ripple effect? How do we use our habits to actually make a difference?
Great question. And Clear tackles that in the last part of the book, where he talks about how our habits can shape our families, our communities, even our whole society.
It really is mind-blowing when you think about it, how those little choices, those habits, they can have such a big impact, not just on us, but on everyone around us.
It's like that butterfly effect, one tiny flap of its wings, and who knows, maybe a hurricane starts brewing on the other side of the world.
Exactly. And Clear talks about that, how our habits can create this ripple effect, shaping our families, our communities, even whole societies.
He says habits are contagious, they spread from person to person. It creates this momentum, this energy. It can either push us forward or hold us back.
It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. You're hanging out with people who have good habits. Well, chances are you'll pick up some of those habits too.
Exactly. And this doesn't just apply to individuals, it's true for companies, even entire countries. Remember that story Clear tells about British cycling?
Oh yeah, how they went from being like average to totally dominating their sport.
They made all these tiny changes, like everything from the bikes to the athletes' pillows and hotels.
It's crazy how those little tweaks added up to a huge advantage.
It really shows you success isn't always about these big dramatic changes. Sometimes it's those small, consistent improvements that make the biggest difference.
Just like those 1% gains we were talking about earlier, but for a whole team. It makes you think, how can we use those same ideas in our own lives? How can we find those little edges, those tiny optimizations that can help us reach our goals?
That's the key takeaway. Even when you've got some good habits going, it's important to keep refining your system, keep experimenting, always looking for those little ways to get better.
So it's not about reaching a certain point and then just stopping, right? You got to keep that growth mindset going, even when things are good.
Exactly. And that's where reflection comes in. Clear says it's super important to regularly take a step back, look at your habits, your progress, and think about where you're heading.
This is where journaling can be really helpful. Taking the time to write down your thoughts, what you're noticing, those little insights you have, it can help you figure out what's working, what needs to change, make sure you're still on the right track.
Totally. It creates this feedback loop. You learn, you adjust, you keep moving forward.
This is making me realize building better habits, it's not just about achieving some specific goal. It's about being more mindful, more intentional about how you live your life.
It's about taking charge of your choices, your actions, and ultimately your own future.
And it all starts with those tiny, almost invisible changes we make every day.
Those little choices that over time can completely transform your life and maybe even the lives of those around you.
Well, that was a fantastic deep dive into atomic habits. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to build better habits and finally break free from those bad ones that have been bugging me.
It's a great book. It's full of practical tips and inspiring stories. Everyone should check it out and start putting these ideas to work. You never know, those little atomic habits could unlock some pretty amazing things.
That's it for our deep dive into atomic habits. We hope you're feeling inspired and ready to start designing your own path to success. Remember, the most important habit is the habit of always getting better. So keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep striving to be the best version of yourself. Until next time, keep diving deep.